San Antonio real estate. Today, Tim talks to Michael Darling, local personal injury attorney, to talk about his journey.
All right, welcome to The Guru and the Good Dude. This is Tim Warlow, the Guru, and I have the honor of bringing on a good buddy of mine, Michael Darling. Now, Michael and I met when we were both in completely different worlds. He was a jazz drummer up at, what school did you go to?
St. Edward's.
St. Edward's.
Undergrad, yeah.
And we met through a mutual friend who wanted us to play an entire Radiohead album from start to finish for his birthday. And we learned the whole album in a matter of days, and it was one of the most fun experiences I've had as a musician. And now, years later, that's probably been over a decade ago now, but
Just barely.
Michael and I got reconnected through another mutual friend, through Alejandro, after they launched a new personal injury attorney law group called the Falcon Law Group. So, Michael, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tim. It's an honor. It's my first podcast, so hello, everyone.
That's exciting, man, because I think you are one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was that you're one of these people who, A, can have a great conversation the whole time, but also you're really passionate and intelligent about a myriad of subjects. So I wanted to start by letting you introduce yourself wherever you want to start, a little bit about your background and what you've done, and we'll start from there.
Cool. Yeah, so I went to UT for law school and graduated in 2017, and then I started at the corporate side of things, big law as they call it, doing commercial litigation, primarily contract defense, and learning the ropes of how these corporations operate with the ultimate goal of paying off my student loans and then going to the personal injury side, so kind of the other side of the fence. Although a lot of corporate work is kind of just fighting over contracts, and personal injury is when people get hurt. So I worked in Houston at a trial firm.
Wait 1 second. Go back real quick. What got you interested in law?
Okay. Yeah, actually, that's an interesting, kind of right after we did that concert, which was in rainbows, cover to cover, and was really, I thought we nailed it.
Yeah.
So after we did that, there was like a New Year's Eve party that I went to, and I woke up January 1st, 2014, and I was kind of trying to figure out what am I going to do with my English degree. And my dad was a lawyer, and I always thought I wanted to do something different because he was a lawyer. Almost like out of like, okay, I want to diversify what the family's doing. I want to do something different. And that morning I was really thinking, like, I'm about to graduate. I'm interviewing for technical writing positions, and I didn't really have any passion for that. Writing manuals for like scientific instruments and stuff just wasn't really interesting, but it's the only way to make money doing English writing.
I want to point out one of my favorite books is The Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Have you ever read it?
I've heard about it.
So it's very much a philosophy book. It borders on like a bit of a mental health crisis this guy's having, but his main job is technical writing.
Oh, wow.
And he makes it sound so fascinating, but you're right. It's very boring.
Yeah. To me, I was not looking forward to it. I was thinking it's a way to pay the bills. So I had all these interviews lined up, and I woke up that morning and we were actually at Horseshoe Bay, out there, condos there or whatever. And it's one of my friends' parents had a condo there. And I was like, well, I was really, I felt like it was a new day. Okay. January 1st, new year. I was thinking about my future. I had 1 semester left in school. And no, I had graduated in December, actually. So I had a semester where I was just going to work driving trucks, which I did, like Penske trucks and stuff like that. And then I said, what am I really going to do? Because I don't want to do technical writing. So I started looking into, I was really researching and reading a lot about Monsanto and all the Roundup stuff, because it was kind of starting to pick up then. And I just thought, it's crazy what these large companies are able to do in our society. And I started researching how do people really impact that? And obviously when regulators are captured by industry and fail at their jobs or are paid off and then no one reports on that because, the corporate capture of the media, what falls through the cracks is private regulation effectively. And so personal injury lawyers pick up the slack theoretically. It doesn't always work perfectly, but it's the best deterrence mechanism that we have. And so I was looking into personal injury because it was totally different than what my dad did, which was insurance defense. So he was primarily defending hospitals and nursing homes. So kind of on the other side of it, like when people, but it was personal injury defense, but specific to hospitals. And I said, I could see that being a really interesting career. And the last day I could apply, I applied to the LSAT, the last day I could sign up for the LSAT. I decided to take the February LSAT. I studied for like 3 days, and I got a good enough score to get in off the wait list at UT, but I had to pay full price for it. So I was like, let's do it.
Wow.
So I was looking at...
You studied for 3 days?
Yeah, like the Princeton review book. I was like, let's see this thing and what's up. And the only part that really tripped me up was the logic games. You really have to kind of know how to do that. But everything else I got like a really high score on. So I was like, let's just go for it. I was looking at a full ride to Baylor versus a full price at UT. And everyone I talked to said, go to UT.
Wow.
Other than like some family friends that didn't really know much, but every lawyer was like, it makes a huge difference where you go. So
so in terms of getting hired later, or
getting hired later at the good, like the best jobs that you can actually, that it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The opportunity cost of 3 years when you could be building a career in something else is a lot.
Yeah.
And 3 years of expenses and tuition and everything. So the only way it made sense was if I could get like one of the big law jobs, and then I did, which was good. And I used that to kind of learn how to write really well.
When you were going through law school, did you still play the drums much?
Yeah, I would say like the first semester I tried to, because it was like part of grounding myself. But then I was in the bottom third my first semester grades, and I was like, I'm not going to get anywhere with this.
Oh.
So then I just buckled down after that. But every year I did do there was a musical, and it was like a parody. Every year would be something different, and we would play the instruments for like to back up the musical.
That's fun.
Yeah.
When I was graduating college, also didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was applying for PhD programs. And one of the other PhDs was like, "You got to give up the band," and I was like,
"No way!
I don't know if I like that idea." Like, but to get through any kind of program like that, law school or PhD programs, you really do. And I'm glad he told me that. Because ultimately I gave up the band anyway, only to start it up another 10 years later. But that was enough for me to say like, oh, even sacrificing this bit for me for this small amount of time. Now, the difference is that law school has a much bigger payoff than a PhD program. Like the long-term, like, financial gain from becoming a lawyer versus a PhD is massive. So it didn't make sense for other reasons.
Right.
But
yeah,
I always wondered if you kept that going. And I know now that you've come, started your career and are starting up this company, we've talked about jamming for the last like 6 months.
It's on the books.
It's on the
hard
books.
to find a mutual time. But no, I still play a little bit.
Yeah.
I picked it back up really like a year ago. I got a new kit and started jamming more, and then just kind of playing by myself, learning songs. But I really, in law school, it was like decreasing. Every year it decreased the amount that I would play.
Yeah.
And then we played a couple gigs after law school for like friends parties and stuff. Like the band that we were in law school, we got back together, played a few things, but I didn't really I didn't touch the drums for years at a time, really.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. Until last year when I picked it back up.
Heck yeah. Well, so you get through law school. Where was your first job out of law school?
So I got a job at a place called Aiken Gump in Houston. They're like everything corporate related, and we were doing mostly commercial litigation. So, we represented a lot of energy companies that were getting sued by other energy companies for breaching contracts or vice versa. We were either the plaintiff or the defendant, and a lot of it's really complicated. So helped me think about things and think about different defenses and stuff from all these different angles, which was nice. And I didn't get to take any depositions. They kept promising me, hey, you're going to take one. And in 2 years, I didn't do any like oral advocacy at all. It was all just written.
Oh, wow.
I was writing briefs and stuff for partners who would then go and use that work to say, hey, look at this. I did this. And it's all the young associates doing everything. So it was a grind, but.
And what you wanted to do, you really saw yourself in the courtroom or doing depositions.
Yeah, trial work. Yeah, but whether it's pretrial like depositions or being in court, that's what I always wanted to do, because that's that's the only way to make a difference.
Yeah, because your statements become part of like general public, or what do you mean by that's the only way to make a difference?
Yeah, as I was saying that, I was thinking there's other ways. Like I have some friends I've made that do all written advocacy. So they do amicus briefs on behalf of, which is like a friend of the court is what they call it. So it's not an actual party involved in that prior suit, but or that suit that's pending, but they write interested briefs on behalf of other parties that would be impacted by the decision. So
okay.
This guy that I know, he's an amazing writer, and he briefs all day long. That's all he does is write briefs. And his most recent one was getting the opiate, the bankruptcy that no, it wasn't opiate. I guess it was talc. The talc litigation related.
Oh yeah,
asbestos.
Asbestos.
Yeah. So he wrote the brief on behalf of the plaintiffs, trying to get I think it was the Second Circuit to basically smash Johnson & Johnson's bankruptcy attempt, because they were doing a fraudulent bankruptcy to try to avoid the liabilities that were stacking up.
Oh my God.
He was able to get the court to say it's not legitimate. And then the Supreme Court either rejected it or they sided with them. So now it's like official that they can't secure bankruptcy and avoid paying these claims.
So he had a pretty big impact.
Huge. Yeah. So I was just thinking, damn, that's not right. That you can have an impact. I think that for me, it's just more interesting to be able to represent people in court and to do the initial stage of it where it's the real fight as I see it. Like written advocacy is mostly done behind the computer, and oral is, a real back and forth, like a debate. And it's a lot more fun.
Yeah, I saw that you were on the trial team in college. So in law school, the mock trial team.
Yeah. That was fun.
And you don't really do that unless you really want, that's what you want to do. And there are different attorneys, obviously, like some want to stay behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what they're good at.
Yeah.
But we all see the guys that are in court doing trial, grilling people.
Yes.
Like some people kind of get off on that in a way of like the intensity of it.
Yes.
And some people want to avoid it.
Right.
So I do like the intensity.
I like the intensity of it. And especially, a cross-examination scenario where I know exactly where I want to go. And I don't necessarily care what the witness says because I have my documents lined up to make the points I want to make.
Yeah.
That's fun. That's the most fun thing, I think. And I would say that, a lot of my classmates tried to avoid that. So it's not a huge mock trial program. A lot of people that go into trial end up being from schools that specialize in trial, because the easiest path to the big money is doing transactional work. So it's like deals with, Coca-Cola is going to buy this whatever company,
like M&A.
M&A. That's where that's like the easiest money, although it's really repetitive and boring.
Yeah.
And so most of my classmates went into either M&A or cross-border work or whatever, oil and gas deals, so I never had an interest in that, and I would have, gone into some other career entirely if it.
But it seems to me like your primary motivation to get into becoming an attorney wasn't about money.
Yeah, that is
about having an impact.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the money's more of a secondary thing. And I think it's like right now, I mean, I took a huge pay cut, obviously, to start my own thing, but it's following my dream, and I'm able to call my own shots. And, there's a lot of things that go on in the personal injury world that aren't the most savory things either. And people don't talk about it as much because there's not transparency. Everything's confidential with settlements. But the way we're really running this firm, the Falcon Law Group, is to do things, treat the clients really like family members.
Yeah.
And so far, we've been able to do that, which is really awesome.
Did you watch the Tyson and Paul fight?
I watched. I didn't watch it like live, but I watched some.
Thomas J. Henry, right across the junk.
Yeah, he's got some money to advertise.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
I mean, definitely can't say anything bad, especially about anybody local. So we're just gonna keep it about Falcon Law Group because you guys just launched this this year, and I mean, it's super exciting. You had a game plan to start kind of accumulating some cases.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what's happened over the last year? Because this is a business podcast.
Sure.
This is a totally different business from what I'm in. But I have been so fascinated talking to you and Alejandro about like how you guys grow this business.
Yeah. So the way that my original game plan was to put together somewhere between 500,000 and $1 million to get the machine started up, which is the case acquisition piece of it. And really 70% of good cases these days come through the internet. So when someone gets out their phone, let's say that someone gets injured in an oil field accident and they are, in the hospital bed, either them or their family member will, if they don't have a family attorney or anybody they know that's in the legal space, which is a lot of people that do these blue collar jobs, they don't often have connections to any kind of attorney. So they'll just Google best personal injury lawyer for this type of injury, like oil field burn accident injury attorney. And then we have to play the game of the search engine optimization and be ranking high on Google in order to get the click and then hopefully convert that lead. And then there's also a whole separate piece that we've started doing, which is TikTok advertising. And that's been like,
I've watched some of your TikToks. How is it growing your following?
Yeah, it's been good. So the organic side of it is pretty like linear. Like if I put out a video that's on a topic that people are interested in, I'll get some views and maybe a few new followers. And then we're just growing our fan base or whatever. I haven't had as much time to do it recently as I'd like. But then I think in February or March, TikTok has said personal injury advertising can occur on their platform. So full blown, we pay for a certain amount per month, and then they show actual advertisements where people can click on, it's like kind of an overview of the firm and my practice so far, and then talking about how we're different than the larger players of the world and people who have been around a little longer, and how we're going to treat them differently. And then if they like that, they click and enter the information about their injuries and when it happened, where it happened, and then I get an email and call them, and then we sign them up. So that's been the main prongs of it. And then there's also like maybe half of our cases that have come through referrals. So in the PI space, personal injury space, there's a lot of peer-to-peer referrals where attorneys can exist entirely on just collecting cases.
Yeah.
So they advertise well, or they otherwise have some connections to get cases. They sign the people up, and then someone like me will know these people, or we meet somehow, and then I've had just maybe like 5 or 6 referral sources that are now sending me most of their big stuff, which has been a huge deal too. So
because those big cases take resources.
Yeah, they take resources and they take time. And a lot of people in the PI space want to get quick settlements, and then that does a disservice to people with really good cases, because their case might be worth $1 million or more, and the insurance company is not just going to roll over and pay that with a pre-litigation demand. And so a lot of people are missing out on potential, fees for themselves, and also doing right by their clients.
Yeah. So you're saying that the attorneys are pushing to close cases faster and settle so they can get on to the next thing, as opposed to really, going for the bigger suit, going to trial.
Yeah. So there's whole firms that do that just try to do only pre-litigation.
Yeah.
So I have a connection now with the local guy that does a lot of good pre-lit work. So he's able to maximize whatever policy there is on an auto case. So any like car accidents I've sent to him, I only want to handle larger stuff, because that's what requires depositions and discovery and litigation. Maybe we're not going to go all the way to trial, but probably settle close to trial.
Yeah.
And that's kind of so everything's very front loaded. So the last year has been a lot of like real hunting and gathering of all these things. So now we have our machine together, and it's working well. And now we're able to take the docket that we have and collateralize that in exchange for litigation financing that allows us to keep building and paying experts. So all these cases, to get to trial, you have to have expert witnesses on most cases, unless it's like a really obvious, trucker rear-ended a guy.
Yeah.
And then in that case, you still need an expert doctor to talk about the lifetime care needs if it's a serious injury. So there's front-loaded expenses that ultimately will get paid by the client after the settlement or verdict, but in the meantime, we have to front those.
You front the cost. So that makes sense. I've always wondered what the expense was, because, you're not going to get that from the client most of the time. Obviously, they haven't been working. They're in debt. They're in medical debt, or they're laid up. So that's where there's some risk in the business.
Right.
When you explained it just now, we actually have very similar means of acquiring clients, which is both online or referrals.
Yeah.
One difference is that I can make cold calls. I don't think you guys are allowed to.
Not unless it's been more than 30 days since the accident, and usually by that time they'll have a lawyer anyway. So we don't invest in that at all. I'd rather just shoot out a broad spectrum type of thing. And the closest we can get to it is called geofencing, which is where, let's say, like, for instance, the Astroworld injury situation where that big concert happened and everyone was trampled and like 9 people died. For that case, that was before we really started this, but the firm that I was at, you can do geo-targeted pushes of ads on Instagram, TikTok, and whatever, using like really specific regions. So like Memorial Hermann Hospital, we want to pump ads just there, and that gets pretty close to talking directly to the people without actually talking to them. So it's kind of like it's totally ethical and legal, but it's a very efficient use of capital. We haven't really figured out any accidents yet that we're trying to do that with. Eventually that would be part of the plan.
Yeah. So what cases are you able to talk about, like things that you are handling that you maybe aren't open, but things that you've done in the past?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I can talk about anything without identifying specific parties.
Yeah.
So I can talk about our cases right now. I can talk about prior cases. Really, pretty much anything, as long as I don't say the plaintiff's name is this and the defendant's name is that. So
yeah.
Really, we can have...
So what would you... I pulled up your website, and like you have some pretty dang big cases like this. The one at the top was the railroad worker.
Yeah, so that was one that I worked on at the prior firm I was at in Houston. And it was pretty crazy. This guy was working as a kind of a laborer for this company that does railroad track maintenance. And so, you see these railroads and they always kind of seem to be in good condition for the most part, other than obviously some notable exceptions that we've learned about recently. But they, in order to keep the road, the rail straight, they have to actually have a machine come in and regulate the distance between the rails, and then also make sure the rocks that are in between the railroad ties are tamped down. So he was working doing the tamping part, which is just taking a big tool, kind of like a rake, but it's flat on the bottom, and pushing down the rocks in front of what's called a ballast regulator, which is like a big, looks like a railroad car, but it's a little smaller, and it uses force to, regulate the distance between the rails. And so someone was operating that behind him on a hill, and he was in front doing the tamping, and it's really loud there. And so they were on like an actual side track, which is where, people can park cars for storage in between. So the main line of the rail is clear. And this was near Dallas. And the ballast regulator had a defective braking system that people didn't know about. And it was an air brake that let the air out a little bit at a time, but eventually it failed completely because it didn't have enough force in the tank to keep the thing still. And so it started rolling down this hill, and it was so loud that no one noticed it because there's, all kinds of noise going on in a rail yard. And it just smashed into him and crushed him between 2 rail cars.
Good God.
Yeah. And so he passed away at the scene, and his wife, we represented for the estate,
Wow.
So we represented her, and the main defendant was the rental company and the owner of the manufacturer of the product. So it was a product liability case, basically a defect
For the brakes?
Yeah, for the brakes, and because they had the equipment 6 months before this and turned it over to a third-party company saying it's in good working condition when it wasn't.
You know what I was just thinking while you were talking that is so interesting about what you do is that every case you have to learn so much. Like, I bet before the case you didn't know
None of it.
how a rail car ballast regulator worked.
Yeah, and I love that about the job.
And you get to dig in and just learn like everything and become as close to an expert as you can in a short amount of time.
Yeah, that's what's fun about it. And then learn from our experts too, who really do this all day, what's wrong with the defense experts, because they'll hire people to say, this wasn't foreseeable or whatever.
Right.
And so then we have to figure out the line of attack on each case, and figure if it's not a great line or there's something comes up that's not clear, then okay, maybe we settle it for less than we thought it was worth originally. But learning how it all works is part of the fun.
Yeah. And in that case, you guys won a $42.5 million verdict.
Yeah. Well, it was a pretrial settlement that I was I was involved in taking a lot of the depositions for the actual railroad owner, because they were a party to the case too. So I took some of those depositions. I presented. I didn't present anybody. I took some of the fact witnesses too. So coworkers who were actually there and were able to testify that he lived a little bit after the incident. So that adds value.
Pain and suffering.
Yeah, pain and suffering. So.
Yeah, you guys mentioned that, which is crazy, but I think it's worth mentioning that, like, in a accidental death or dismemberment, the length of time that a person stays alive after they've been injured adds $1 million a day or something like that to the claim.
At a minimum, I would say, in certain venues.
Yeah.
So if we're in a really conservative county with a lot of people who make very little money, then it's worth less than in a bigger county where people are willing to award more money.
Yeah.
There's kind of a sweet spot where in an analysis of where the jury's going to be pulled from. But this was in Dallas County, which has become a really good venue for plaintiffs, because you have a large percentage of the population that's kind of, making decent money but not crazy money, and they don't love these companies, but they also don't completely hate them.
Yeah.
And
they're more in the middle.
Yeah,
they're not coming in biased, like, fuck big government, or like we hate unions, or we hate when people try to take advantage of corporations. Yeah.
So it's a good venue.
That's interesting too, because I have clients that I've worked with in commercial real estate that have actually moved recently, within the last few years, moved their companies out of Bexar County, because Bexar County is so favorable to the plaintiffs most of the time. And so, like, a trucking company that's here, or one of those industrial companies, they get sued 250 times, 300 times a year, right?
Yeah.
Just
because the big ones,
because of road incidents. If they have a couple hundred vehicles on the road, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And they were losing a crazy amount of money, and they moved up the road to New Braunfels, and they were like, well, you can pick to sue in the county that it happened in, or where the corporation is located.
Yeah.
And so that, like, offsets some of their risk.
Yeah. And I would say, like, from a premium perspective, I really can't even speak to that, because almost everything is covered by insurance.
Yeah.
So, but if they probably had their premiums go up if they were hit a lot.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I'm not at the risk of, messing with my future cases. Yeah, I think that's the smart thing to do as a company, is to move your company headquarters somewhere where it's more favorable to defense, because we're going to take advantage of the way the system works.
Yeah.
And you can, there's several locations where there's a statute that says you can sue where the accident happened, where the defendant lives, any of the defendants, or where the principal office is in the state, if the company is headquartered out of state. So that can depend on basically where they have the most workers in the state and where they have the largest office.
Gotcha.
So it's usually a major city.
Have you been outside of Texas for trials?
Not for trials. So everything I've tried has been in Texas. We have cases outside of Texas, and I've worked on cases all across the country, really.
Cool.
Yeah.
Are there any cases you're working on right now that you feel really passionate or strongly about, that you're probably taking to trial, or something's coming up that you're working on?
Yeah, there's a couple. So one is still in the early phases. We just got the case a couple months ago, and there's a process when someone dies in order to get the surviving spouse or whoever is going to claim part of the ownership of the case effectively appointed to represent the estate. In that case, the probate court so it's a whole separate court system for wills and estates. And if the person died without a will, which this person did, then a judge has to evaluate all the potential heirs and say, you're the person who we should appoint. And it's almost guaranteed that it's going to be the surviving wife, in this case, the widow. But there's a whole process, and that the hearing's in a couple weeks to do that, and it involves a whole separate court system. So we haven't filed it yet, but I expect that one will either go to trial or get really close to trial. So what happened is the Pedernales Electric Company, they have a bunch of power poles, they're a big regional rural power provider.
Yeah.
And I think I could talk about them because they're a large enough company and they have accidents all the time. I won't talk about any of the other parties, but a PEC line was being worked on by a national company that services power lines. And what they do is go in and string new power lines, or they repair existing power lines. That's what they specialize in around the country. And so our client worked as a lineman for them. So his job is to get up in the bucket truck that you see and work on the new line. And then that's it every day. Just get up there and do some kind of work on the line. So this was in a rural area where a new subdivision required increased amperage on the lines. And in order to prevent problems with the lines, they were stringing in larger gauge wire so that putting more current through the line would decrease the load on the line because the gauge. And so I've learned just a little bit about electrical.
Yeah, you can be an electrician now.
Yeah, right. Just an armchair one. So this guy was working on the power line, and something happened where the live line, which is like 3 feet away from the dead line, they were stringing in the dead line, he became the fastest point to ground. And so he was burned really badly. And he survived for 3 days afterward and then passed away due to his injuries. Pretty brutal. And a lot of things went wrong that we found out that it can put fault on both companies. And I think it does put a lot of fault on both companies. And it looks like, I think that OSHA is going to likely issue a citation to the employers. So OSHA really, people don't know this, but OSHA only deals with employers. So whether or not something else went wrong, they cannot even speak to that. So the fact that, so they only cite the direct employer. So they're probably going to receive a citation. We'll know in a few months. And what went wrong is a simple piece of plastic, really rubber, that is industry standard to put on the live line was not given to our client. And so he was working next to the live line and something happened. We don't know exactly, but we're working to figure that out. When we file the case, we'll get more documentation and things because we'll have a right to discovery. But it seems like through the grapevine, there was not what they call a cover-up. That's just a long 2 or 3 foot piece of rubber that would have made this not happen because we wouldn't have been able to contact, they would have insulated the wire.
Yeah.
A $10 piece of rubber. And so that's definitely a huge issue with the company that he worked for. And then on top of that, PEC didn't have anyone out there supervising the work to make sure it's up to their own standards.
Yeah.
And so they would have, there were so many opportunities for someone to intervene. The company had an uncertified worker who was operating the bucket truck, and he was the son of the supervisor. So he's kind of this, dude that just needed a job, and they hadn't trained him or anything. He hadn't been certified. And all kinds of things went wrong.
I was thinking like in general about really risky jobs.
Yeah.
When it becomes a situation where people no longer see the risk because they do it all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, unfortunately, these are the incidences that make people like perk up and go, oh, wait,
right.
We should have been way more careful. We took advantage or took for granted how dangerous this really was.
Yeah.
And that shit happens all the time.
All the time. Every day.
Every day. Hundreds
of times around the U.S.
Well, and because we've talked about this before, but that was a pretty young guy, right? He was in his early 20s.
He was 33.
33.
He leaves behind a 9 and an 11-year-old.
Yeah. And it's something so simple. So like going back to your motivation and your passion of getting into this, these kind of cases are the things that serve justice for the little guy, the lineman, or the guy who shows up to work every single day. He's not the owner of a company. He's the guy that like makes sure there's power to the new subdivision.
Yeah.
And so like you're defending him, but you're also really defending everybody who works under conditions that are not safe, that are not, that are taken advantage of, that are taken for granted.
Yeah, that's the idea, is that something like this can make an industry-wide impact. I mean, the company has already changed its policy on that, which is too little too late, right?
Yeah.
The policy they have now to put the cover-up on there would have saved his life.
Right.
And that's one of the issues with the tort system as a means of regulation, is that it's always, by virtue of the fact that it's, that in order for someone to even sue, they have to have some type of claim, and an injury has to have occurred. It's always backward looking, but it's the best that we have when there's no one policing this otherwise.
So you're saying that for people that don't know the tort system, like to create a new law or regulation on something, there has to be, like, somebody has to die or get injured?
Well, when people that are tasked with regulating these industries are asleep at the wheel.
Yeah.
So let's say, OSHA theoretically could be beefed up to have a lot more supervision of these companies. It just doesn't happen. Or other consumer protection agency industries and things like that. So when those industries are effectively self-regulating, this is going to happen over and over again. And, it may be the most efficient means for everyone available to. The idea, I think, is that eventually when hit with enough large lawsuits, the companies will start doing the safer thing because it makes more economic sense. So,
well, that brings up an interesting point, going back to one of the companies that you mentioned at the beginning, like Monsanto.
yeah.
How many freaking times have they been sued for the same shit over and over and over?
Yeah.
And they just go, I think one of the cases, and I think it was even RFK might have been one of the people that had the class action lawsuit.
Yeah.
The Roundup suit.
Yeah, he was involved in it.
And it was something like $4 billion, like some astronomical number.
They made, part of the deal that they made to resolve, I think 80% of and I worked on actually the Roundup cases at my old firm where we had the largest docket at the time, I don't know about now, but the largest docket of private Roundup cases that hadn't been resolved yet. And the idea that I think worked really well for the firm I was at, and something that I want to work on myself when we get to the point of getting into mass torts, which is like, I have 1,000 clients that all got injured in the same way by this product. That's a mass tort, whether it's pharmaceutical. It's different from a class action because the class action, they're all one case, and they all usually relate to something small, like overbilling on my phone by $10 a month. No one would take that case on a 40% contingency because the most you'll ever make is $4. So you have to put it together with like thousands of other cases.
Yeah.
A mass tort, each case is in itself a serious injury that has its own case because there's not a commonality of the injuries. They might have all been injured in the same way, but all the specifics are very different. I got, this level, stage 4 of non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and it was this subtype or whatever. So,
like Agent Orange type stuff, or like the mesothelioma, like asbestos.
Mass tort.
Yeah.
And the Roundup cases all related to non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And we had a lot at the time, thousands, and we were preparing them for trial because the only way these companies really get to a point of settlement is if they get popped a few times first. And that's why the whole litigation was messed up, because a couple people that didn't know what they were doing took some of them to trial and lost 3 or 4 in a row. And so then the company starts to think, well, I mean, I can pay like $10,000 a case and get out of these, but that's not what non-Hodgkin lymphoma is worth. I mean, that's crazy.
Right.
So the Roundup litigation is a good example where Monsanto, they went from making PCBs, which make electrical conduction more effective, but they're very poisonous to wildlife and fish, and they're a forever chemical.
Wow.
And they were found in, the eggs of remote eagles in Alaska. So that's how widespread these chemicals got.
And this started in California, or?
The Roundup litigation started, I would say the first wave of it started in California. And then the firm that I was at the time, we really were just collecting those cases, and then we started filing them. And we did a meeting, a kind of a nationwide meeting where we were trying to figure out where to file them, because you can get creative with where to file them if you have where they were sold as an individual defendant, and you can keep the case in state court that way. So the way the rules work, not to get too into the weeds, but if you sue a defendant and there's diversity, meaning like I'm from Texas and the defendant I'm suing is from Illinois and I'm suing in Florida because that's where I got injured, then they can remove it to federal court. And then in federal court, the system is a lot stricter and tougher, and it's harder to get to trial because the judges tend to be more, business friendly just for whatever reason. A lot of them are ex-big firm attorneys like myself, and they tend to see things from a defense perspective, and they have lifetime appointment, so they don't really care what the result,
That sounds kind of broken.
It's a little bit. I would say, the best way to deal with it is to avoid federal court.
Yeah.
So we found like local retailers in Pennsylvania, True Value, Ace Hardware, they were all locally owned, so they all count as individual businesses. And since they were in the state where we were suing, there was no diversity, and they were a Pennsylvania defendant in a Pennsylvania court. And so the case had to be kept in state court. And then the guys that I worked 4 basically just went to trial and got some stupid, huge verdicts on those cases, like $2 billion.
Wow.
Which that won't probably, they'll probably reduce that on appeal, but it makes a statement for the rest of the cases like, hey, we know that you got out of these other cases for cheap because people got scared and started settling for cheap, but you have to pay us a lot more for our docket because we're going to keep hitting you because we know how to do it. So that's, when a good firm does that, I think it's the ideal scenario for creating a deterrence of that kind of behavior. So theoretically, Monsanto eventually is going to stop selling this product and they're going to have to do something else. What they're going to do next, who knows? But
probably something worse. They're going to
probably something worse.
Selling, who are just going to put cancer directly into their product.
And the issue are, cancer promoters. So I think the most interesting thing about it is when we have a regulatory system that's not captured by industry, that won't work. So it kind of is like a hand-in-hand, I think, partnership between private tort lawyers, which are personal injury lawyers, and then, the government in some sense, which who knows what might happen. If we clean that piece up, then we might get a better system where people aren't doing this as a means of making money because they know it'll be more expensive to pay for the damages rather than to just do it right on the front.
Yeah, that that makes me think of like recalls because I have a Tesla and there's been a lot of recalls, and Elon is very like open about the means of how people decide to make recalls.
Yeah,
right? Like it's only realized it in the last couple of years, but they basically do a calculation of saying like, what's the risk if we don't fix it?
right.
And how much do you think we'll get sued for and lose? Or what's it going to cost to recall everything and fix it? And that's terrible because the truth is like, what's the right thing to do?
Yeah, exactly.
If you know there's like something that's harmful or dangerous to people's lives, you should just fucking fix it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
so
that's crazy.
If you watch the beginning of Fight Club, where he talks about he's a risk adjuster.
Yeah.
And he talks about how they analyze these things. It really is how it works. They basically have meetings where they say, okay, we're going to get 100,000 personal injury cases and each one is going to be worth $100,000. But if we fix it the right way, we're going to have to pay, $1 billion. So we're just going to leave it for now. And in the process, they're gambling with human life.
Yeah.
And that's like the Ford Pinto was a good example back in the day. And so part of what we do, I think, is create more transparency in that whole process too, because now people start to distrust these companies when they're saying, okay, this is safe or whatever. And I think that's in my perspective, like philosophically, an ideal society is one in which everyone has access to information about the risks that they're encountering. And that doesn't happen until we shine the light on, until someone does, whether it's the government or private lawyers or something, and so that's an interesting part of the job too, is like learning new stuff about risks that they try to hide.
Well, and one of the things looking at your TikTok, like one of your biggest videos is the one on PFAS.
Yeah. Huge issue, right?
What is PFAS? What's going on?
So it's a group of chemicals that are used to make things slippery. So it's in everything, or waterproof, or both. So it's in everything from raincoats to boots to Scotchgard is almost entirely a PFAS. It's perfluoroalkyl substances. So it's a whole umbrella term relating to the way that the molecule is organized. So it's a fluorinated hydrocarbon, and chemically, they were first developed and used by DuPont for the creation of Teflon, which is in those nonstick pans, and it was used at a plant in rural West Virginia, where they were just, because the chemical was created before the EPA was created, they were grandfathered in. They didn't have to provide any safety studies or testing or anything. There's thousands of
that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect, right? Like, so
we created this agency after you already had the product,
so no worries. So
no worries.
Not on the back that these companies, and that's one of the issues with the federal level, is that it's so corrupt by industry that it almost makes it harder for states to do any better.
Yeah.
And that's part of the issue with having a large central government and relying upon that entity to be an effective regulator. So anyway, back then they created this thing, and it all got discovered by this cow farmer who was downstream from the facility where they were dumping the waste, and they were just putting it in drums. But over the course of time, the material degraded the drums and it got into the water, and it got into a stream where the cows were drinking from, and hundreds of cows were dying in this guy's farm. And so he went to his neighbor's grandson, who was just becoming a partner at a chemical defense firm in Cincinnati. And it was actually established by William Howard Taft, the president. It was called the Taft Law Firm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this dude is like going to all these, banquets for Dow and DuPont and trying to like brown nose to get more business from the corporate side. And then this farmer walks into his office, and there's a movie about it actually starring Mark Ruffalo. It came out like a few years ago called Dark Waters. It's really good.
I love Mark Ruffalo.
Yeah, he's great. And the movie's amazing, actually. It didn't get a lot of press because these chemical companies fund, a lot of where the press would happen. But so long story short, PFAS are in a lot of things, and every household has some, and there's some beneficial uses for them. But having them in products that contact food is not, I don't think, a wise thing. So, I mean, I cook with stainless, and a lot of restaurants, they do like cast iron or stainless.
Yeah.
But these nonstick substances are, everybody's urine has metabolites of them in there, and they're forever chemicals. So they kind of like bioaccumulate.
Oh, wow.
And part of that mass tort that occurred, that he ended up spearheading, his company that he worked for, his firm said, you better make this work. And they kept cutting his salary every year because he wasn't getting any money in the door. Like, rather than his corporate partners who were bringing in business that they could bill $500 an hour on and make money that month, he was bringing in no money because he was doing effectively plaintiff's work under the shop of a corporate firm. But he ended up getting a huge settlement for like $800 million or something. And so over 30 years, it was worth it. But it consumed his life.
It took 30 years.
It took, I think, 15 to 20 years. But yeah, because they had to put, part of the settlement agreement said that if Dow and DuPont would each select a panel of 3 epidemiologists that were from wherever they wanted. They could be from around the world, and the plaintiffs were going to select another 3. So it was a 6 panel, and one side got to choose their 3, and the other side got to choose their 3, and they were going to convene several times a year and use the testing data that they got from the blood of people who were incentivized to give their blood in that town by virtue of they got paid like a few $100, but it's a very poor town. And so they were going to give blood that would be analyzed in the sample, and they got like 70,000 volunteers or something. So it was a huge data set. And if they found a probable link between the exposure to the levels of the PFAS that was in their water supply and one or more conditions, so cancer, liver disease, kidney disease, then those claims could proceed to trial. That was the agreement that both sides signed. There was a private way of dealing with this because no one had analyzed it yet, because the government was being paid off to say, oh yeah, the limit in the water is whatever, and it's no worries after that, which it was crazy. So they ended up finding, the safety panel found a link between like 10 different conditions and the exposure to the levels that were in their public water.
Wow.
And so after that point, they tried to fight it. DuPont tried to fight the agreement, but the court held them to it, and they started trials in the process, and they got millions in each verdict, and then they finally just paid the rest of the claims. But now there's PFAS claims popping up all around the country because it's kind of like the next asbestos in the sense that it's pervasive. It's everywhere. And it's in firefighting foam. And so a lot of these Air Force bases, they have drills where they spray the foam all the time as part of their federal requirements. And it just goes right into the water supply. It goes right into the water table when it gets on the ground because it's a very slippery material. And so it's a huge thing where everything right now is cooking in that litigation. And it's probably going to be 10, 15, 20 years. You still even see the mesothelioma commercials on late night TV or whatever. And that's going to just happen over again with PFAS. And so what they did is they changed the structure of the molecule to something slightly different. But, basically this happens a lot. When one molecule gets found out to have been dangerous and the company knew about it, well, they just changed to something else that's a little bit different, but then 20 years down the road, that's going to probably have a problem too.
Sure.
So until we really clean up that partnership between private attorneys and the regulators, we're going to, and I mean, some people say it's just part of human nature. And it may be. I mean, there may really be no full solution, but large verdicts help move that in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it goes back to the duality of man, right? It's like you're good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
You're on either side, you can see it either way.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
people get absorbed into their own world and they can't break away from it and say, "Oh, what I'm doing is wrong,"
Right.
because they truly believe that their like job is to protect this company or protect this thing.
Yeah, it's like a religion.
Yeah, and it's so what you're doing. I mean, even if it's inefficient,
Yeah.
having to wait all these years and sue these companies to hold them accountable, it may be close to the best thing we have.
I think right
Which
now,
unfortunately is, because the other part of it too is that we can't really predict. We can't always see what the other side would be like. Like, well, they're making foam that fights fires, so like the foam has helped save lives or saved houses or property or whatever. So it's and Teflon is pretty fucking awesome.
Yeah, it is. It worked really well.
It works really well. But yeah, to your point, it's like we don't know what's always going to be bad for people until it's been.
That's true.
years.
Yeah, that's true. And so that's why, the European system works better, I think, but it's also still inefficient. Like they have what's called the precautionary principle that underlies their and I was a research assistant for a professor who was really interested in all this stuff. So I helped her get ready for an international water law conference relating to PFAS and associated risks. And so I researched a lot about the different frameworks, and the EU framework is called REACH. It stands for Regulation and blah, 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 chemicals, something. And what it does is requires manufacturers to produce at least a minimum level of safety data before they're even allowed to put the product on the market. Where that falls short is like the long-term risks, right? So probably they could have pieced together some studies on rats for PFAS and said, look, we studied them for a year or 2 years and nothing happened. Right. If kidney cancer takes 10 years to develop, then it still allows other things to emerge. And so there's really no clear way to stop it other than just to be reactive to when these things rise. And when the companies, really where it becomes a huge issue is when the companies know about it.
Yeah. Like tobacco.
And PFAS, there's oil, similar. Yeah, oil. Lots of pharmaceutical products they'll put out with knowledge that they either rig the studies you can mess a lot with statistics. In terms of like the window that they study and the excluding factors for what would become someone who could be in the group. And there's a lot of, and so that's another piece that's really interesting is like the biostatistics expert piece of all of the bigger cases like this is figuring out what's wrong with the studies that they're relying on to say to the regulators, look, we're doing a good job. And that's, we looked at that a lot in the Roundup cases, and there was a drug called Risperdal. That's another thing we did a huge litigation on it had a very high risk of gynecomastia in males. So males were developing breast tissue, and it's an antipsychotic. So the people who were getting the breasts were already very troubled.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, so that was like a mess of a case that they had internal meetings about, should we tell our academic partners, which were basically the Johnson & Johnson paid professors and things in chemical departments throughout the country who were writing favorable studies for them. Should we tell them about this, this finding that it's like 11% gynecomastia risk for males, or should we just keep making the kind of money we're projected to make on this? And so it's, when you have stuff like that, it's like, that's a really clean-cut case.
Sure.
And that happens more often than you'd think because the internal documents are just damning.
Yeah.
And, that's really interesting. Huh?
Somebody goes, go bury this.
Yeah, go bury this, or like, let's not talk about it and we'll figure it out later. And that's the problem, is when it's baked in. The cost of doing business involves ruining human lives.
Yeah, what's kind of funny, though, that happens so often, like when the companies are doing well and making a lot of money, the stories we tend to hear about are like the Enrons and the Theranos of the world where people fucked over investors.
Yeah.
Like when the investor loses, then we find out that all of these bad things happen and
all the power goes away.
So like, Yeah, the money,
Like when people have,
corrupts.
when people who have power get hurt,
Yeah,
then all of a sudden people go to prison.
right.
But when it's just some inner city people in Chicago who were given a psychotropic drug by virtue of their, institutionalized psychiatrist who doesn't know any better, well, then, we have to do a confidential settlement to get that money.
Wow.
Yeah. Because otherwise the companies just don't, if it's not confidential, they don't pay, And so that's where things become a little tricky is we're helping this group of people, but in the process, there's going to be more people who this happens to.
Sure.
It's an imperfect system.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, man, this has been fascinating. Honestly, I could go on and on about it.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Is there anything you want people to know about how to contact you or what kind of cases to bring you for Falcon Law?
Yeah, sure. So anything, really, we would handle anything where someone is seriously injured. Typically after the injury, they would need treatment, emergency treatment of some kind. And we'll look at any kind of personal injury case, but those are the kind of ones I enjoy handling and am passionate about. Anything where somebody took a medication and they suffered really serious side effects that weren't disclosed to them, and pesticides and developed cancer, anything like that, we enjoy. That's what we're passionate about. And how to contact, we have a contact us form on our website. It's just thefalconlawgroup.com, falconlawgroup.com. And, or you can reach out to us on social media, TikTok, Instagram. It's all the Falcon Law Group is our handle. So, love to hear from anyone in the public, and thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening to The Guru and the Good Dude, and we'll catch you guys next time.